darkness they stumbled into was almost complete, or so it seemed at first. Jason had just enough time to catch his feet when he heard the sound of a door slam shut behind him. He whirled around, Sophie and Megan doing the same. The front door was shut against the outside. Megan was the first to move. She lunged at the door. "No!" she said and moaned when the knob didn't turn. She tried a few times before giving up, her hands coming up to her face. "Please, no." Jason's eyes were starting to adjust better to the gloom. They were standing in the entryway of the house. To one side was the dining room, and to the other was the kitchen. Between the rooms was a hallway and a staircase leading to the second floor. There were doors along the hallway, but they were closed. The floor was hardwood, with throw carpets placed strategically around. "What is this?" Sophie said, also looking around. Her face reflected his own confusion. The house was not as Jason would have imagined it. It was clean, tidy, and most of all, it showed no sign of having endured a fire at all. It was picture perfect, just like the homes one might see on the cover of a homeowner's magazine. The sound of wood creaking made them all jump. Megan grabbed onto Sophie, and Sophie grabbed onto Jason. They looked around, wild-eyed. It was silent again. "What was that?" Sophie said, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Jason said. He wished very much that he had never come to this place. "What do we do?" Sophie said. She looked at Megan. "Megan, ease up, you're hurting me." Megan apologized and lessened her grip, if only a little. Jason was thinking when ahead of them, he heard the sound of one of the doors clicking open. They froze in place and watched as a door at the end of the hallway began to swing outwards on screaming hinges ever so slowly. An ominous red mist began to pour out of the doorway. It glowed with luminescent light. The mist spread out into the hallway, billowing down towards them. The girls were stricken with terror. Jason didn't know what that mist was. All he knew was that they should not touch it under any circumstances. That seemed correct to him. He pulled Sophie towards the living room. "Come on," he said through clenched teeth which rattled. The three of them stumbled through the living room, attached together. Jason looked back, the red glow becoming stronger in the hallway. His eyes widened when he saw a shadow cast upon the door. It was the shape of a man, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, and the head was angular and elongated. He saw it reach out a long-fingered hand outwards, as if reaching for them. Jason didn't wait to see what would happen next. He pulled the two girls with all his might out of the living room. They entered another hallway. This time there was a staircase leading down. At the end of the hallway were glass doors leading to a back or side porch. Jason could see trees beyond the yard. "That's it," he said. "Let's get out of here." He had to get the girls to safety. Then he would come back for the rest. "What about Derek and the others?" Sophie said, digging her heels. "We can't leave them behind." As if in answer, the house creaked around them. Megan shrieked. "It's too dangerous," Jason said. Sophie's gaze grew hard. "Dangerous for us because we're girls," she said. "Is that it?" Jason hesitated. They didn't have time to argue. "Fine, but we need to move quickly and check out all the rooms," he said. Sophie nodded. "Let's stick together too," she said. Jason nodded. Megan tagged along with them, whimpering and shaking like a leaf. They checked behind them and confirmed that the red mist and the entity that Jason saw was not following them anymore. At least that's what they hoped. The first place to look was the stairs that led downwards. Jason approached the dark opening, his hairs standing on end and adrenaline coursing through his veins. At the first sign of anything coming out of that darkness, he would run for his life. He just hoped he was quick enough. He flicked the light switch. He didn't expect it to turn on, but to their pleasant surprise, it did just that. The staircase was illuminated. The soft yellow glow showed a cement floor and exposed insulation placed into the walls of the unfinished basement. Jason was about to take the first step down when Megan grabbed him. "No, I can't go down there," she said. Jason patted her arm and gave Sophie a pleading look. "Help me with her," it said. "We need to find Derek and the others, and then we can leave this place," Jason said. "I'm with you, Megan. We aren't going to leave you, and we are going to make it back home," Sophie said, holding her face so Megan looks into her eyes. "You got that?" Megan managed to nod. "Okay," she said, though not sounding very sure. Jason stepped down on the first step. It was surprisingly firm. He expected it to creak and complain, but it made nary a sound. He continued on. Behind him, the girls came as well. They reached the bottom without incident, but Jason couldn't see far into the basement. The stairway light was not enough. He searched for another light switch. When he found it, he was about to flick it on when something grabbed his wrist. Before he knew it, a sweaty hand was clamped over his mouth. Jason watched as hands came out of the darkness and grabbed the girls as well. They tried to scream, but the sounds were muffled by the hands. "Don't scream." It was Kyle's voice. "He will hear you." Jason stopped struggling, his heart pounding so hard in his chest he thought it would literally rip through his rib cage. Seeing as he had no choice, he slowly nodded his head. "That goes for the rest of you too," Derek said. Jason couldn't tell where he was exactly, but he was one of the ones holding the girls. They nodded as well. The hands were released from their mouths. Jason breathed a sigh of relief. Megan crumpled to the ground. "Megan," Sophie said. Amber stepped into the light, hissing. "Shh, quiet," she said, a finger to her lips. "He will hear you." Jason stepped up next to her, keeping his voice low. "Who will hear?" he said. The other three looked at each other. Their eyes were wells of fear. When they didn't answer, Jason looked around. "Where's Ryan?" he said. Amber clapped her hands to her face, uttering a muffled groan, and the boys looked down at their feet, their frames trembling. Jason got a sinking feeling in his stomach. Sophie helped Megan to her feet. "We need to get out of here," she said. "I want to go home." Megan said to no one in particular, "Please, I want to go home." "We will," Sophie said. "We'll get home, okay?" Megan didn't answer, but began to cry again. Derek looked at her, his eyes blazing at Megan, his hands bunched into fists. Jason had seen him like this plenty of times. He got mad easy, and when he got mad, chances were pretty good that he would let his fists fly. Still, Jason didn't expect Derek to walk up to the sobbing girl, grab her by the shoulder with one hand, and then slap her across the face with the other. Megan's crying stopped all at once. Jason, Sophie, and Kyle let out a gasp. Amber grabbed Derek's hand when he brought it back up for another round. "Stop it," she said, holding him back with difficulty. "She doesn't know." Derek's eyes were unseeing, full of rage. He clawed after Megan, who held her face, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. "We all want to go home, Megan," he said, growling in a low voice. "Ryan wants to go home too. We are not leaving without him." Kyle stepped in to help Amber hold Derek back. Sophie shot a baleful glare at Derek as she crouched to help Megan stand up again. Megan wiped her mouth. Blood came away on her hand. Her teeth were stained red. "Calm down, man," Kyle said. Derek shoved himself away from them. "Let go of me," he said. They let go. He rubbed his wrists, watching Megan with a look of intense dislike. "You always were stupid, Megan." They all turned to look at Derek. Kyle tried to say something, but Derek cut him off. "You want to know something? We don't even like you. We might if you ever said anything useful or funny, anything at all. But you're useless. Today proves it." Megan looked down at her feet, ashamed. Sophie stepped forward. "How dare you?" she said. "You need to apologize." "Why should I?" Derek said. He looked around at everyone. Lastly, his eyes ended up on Kyle's. Kyle couldn't hold his gaze and looked away. "Don't act like every one of you haven't thought the same thing. Megan chose to abandon her friend when he needs us the most. I always had a low opinion of you. You're scum." "That's enough," Sophie said. "We can't fight amongst ourselves if we are going to get out of this place." Derek got a strange quality to his eyes. They seemed to gloss over in a way that alarmed Jason. "There is no getting out of this place," he said in a dreamlike voice. "We are trapped here forever." Jason turned to Kyle. "What is he talking about?" Kyle was white as a sheet. "We have tried to leave," he said. "Many times. The house, it plays tricks on you. It makes you think you are escaping or making progress, but then you end up back inside somehow." A tear slipped down his cheek. Jason looked at Amber. He had never seen her face so grim before. "You guys can't have possibly tried everything. You've only been in here like 10 or 20 minutes, he said. Derek's head shot up. He, Amber, and Kyle looked at each other, alarm crossing their faces. "Jason," Amber said at last. Her voice came out scratched from a dry throat. "We've been in here for days." This stunned the others to silence. Jason couldn't believe his ears. If they weren't in this predicament, he would have called them out for yanking his leg. "It can't be," Sophie said, backing up until she hit the wall. "You weren't gone even an hour. We would have noticed." "I don't think this place really follows the rules," Kyle said. "We've been finding that out the hard way." "What do you mean?" Jason said. Derek spoke up this time. "I think that we should explain what happened from the beginning," he said, looking at the others. "We don't have time for that," Amber said. "We need to find Ryan and get out of here, pronto, as in sooner rather than later." Derek shook his head. He seemed a lot more level-headed now, which Jason was grateful for. "I think we are missing something. In all the craziness we've been going through, we haven't had time to reflect," he said. Ryan ran his hands through his hair. "Well, what good do you think that will do? Are you thinking there's actually an answer to how this place works?" he said. Derek nodded, and Jason thought he knew what Derek was thinking. "Just because this place doesn't follow the rules we know, doesn't mean it doesn't have any rules," Jason said. "Does that sound about right?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, but we haven't had time to piece it all together. I was thinking about everything when you guys suddenly showed up." "Well then, let's hear it," Sophie said. Derek pointed up to the light. "Turn that off first. We don't want him to notice us down here," he said. Jason rushed up the stairs as quietly as he could and flicked off the light. The way back down was dark. He ended up missing the last step and almost falling. Amber caught him before he crashed to the floor. "Thanks," he said. Amber led him to the corner where the others were waiting. It was almost completely pitch black. Jason could barely see his hand in front of his face. They pressed themselves to the wall. Derek and Megan took either side of the corner. Kyle and Amber sat at Derek's side, while Jason and Sophie sat at Megan's. Jason felt Sophie's fingers lace into his. He gave her a reassuring squeeze, unsure of how much comfort his gesture really gave, if any. "I guess I'll start," Derek said. He was about to say something more when a long, moaning creak of the house interrupted him. They all stiffened. "What is that?" Sophie said. "It almost sounds alive." "Quiet," Derek said in a desperate whisper. "If he hears you, he'll find us." Another creak moved through the wood of the house. Then Jason thought he heard something else, a dull thud, like a heavy footstep. Then he heard it again. Something was coming down the hallway. It was coming towards the stairs. They all held their breath as something came to the top of the stairs. Between every one of its slow steps, the whole house creaked and moaned, as if it strained to contain whatever it was moving within its walls. "He's here," Kyle said, his voice barely audible. No one else breathed a word. No one else dared. Jason thought he saw the barest form of that shadow being cast down the stairwell to the floor of the basement. It was the same shape of the man with the stretched limbs and face. It stayed there for what seemed like an eternity. Then, at long last, the footsteps moved away again. Eventually, the creaking of the house ceased, the sound of its footsteps no more. "What is that thing?" Sophie said. Jason would have been surprised if she was actually expecting a coherent answer. Derek leveled his eyes at her. "We don't know," he said. "Whatever it is, all we know is that it is hunting us."